One of the things I've always mulled with is when we think about the stats we've discussed in the crisis and the issues in society,
Yeah.
The direction of travel and how we're living our lives, more digital, more alone, more lonely, more dependent on processed foods and sugars and other chemicals to keep ourselves seemingly balanced. It feels like the solution must be quite deep, systemic in the way that we're designing our society. So the question I've always wondered is, do we have to just like rip up the entirety of the blueprint of how society is designed to solve for these problems? Loneliness, depression, sexlessness, all of those subject matters.
I don't think so. I think the solutions are simpler than the incumbents want to admit in corporations. A key component of entrenchment is the delusion of complexity. Twitter and Google and Meta will say that the hate speech and the polarization that they've created in the teen depression are kind of indicative of broader problems in our society and are these really complex problems, and they kind of stare thoughtfully into the camera like, we got to solve these problems together. Yet, when they kick one account off of Twitter, the real Donald Trump, an election and misinformation goes down 40 to 60% in one day. If they age-gated social media, I think you would see a dramatic decline in teen depression. If you remove Section 230 protections, I think YouTube would find ways to stop radicalizing young men on YouTube. I think the solutions are simpler than, they're simpler, but they're expensive. And specifically, they're expensive against the people in charge, and that is rich people and corporations. And I'll give you an example. If you were to try and reverse engineer the problems in our society to kind of one blast zone, one ground zero, I think it's what we said before. I think it's that for the first time in our society, in democracies, it's happened in the U.S., it's about to happen across the majority of the 28 countries in the EU. For the first time, a 30-year-old isn't doing as well as his or her parents. That's a fundamental breakdown in the compact between a family and a society. And they get angry and they blame the government, or they start demonizing, and then someone fills that void and starts demonizing other groups and says, oh, it's not your fault, it's their fault. And that can lead to very ugly places in history. So my solutions are pretty straightforward. If you have the average 70-year-old is 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago, and the average person under the age of 40 is 24% less wealthy, and the percentage of wealth as a percentage of GDP controlled by people under the age of 40 has been cut in half, and a house is 12 times more expensive than it was 40 years ago, but their income is only 6x what it used to be, we have too much money being crowded into not only the rich, but the old. And if you were to try and have one answer that would address not all of it, but really take a dent out of obesity, addiction, deaths of despair, male abandonment, divorce, depression. If we raised, and I don't know the numbers here, but if we raised in the United States the minimum wage, if we tripled the minimum wage, I think you would go a long way to solving a lot of those problems. I think putting more money in the pockets of young people and reducing the rage and the shame and the deaths of despair would go so far to solving loneliness. I think it's pretty basic. At the end of World War II, the top tax rate was 92%. We just decided rich people are here to reinvest in the middle class. When Reagan entered office and when Thatcher entered office, the top tax rates were about 70%. By the time Reagan left office, it was 27%. What we've seen across studies, University of California, Riverside and UC Berkeley did studies on minimum wage. And in Washington State, California, and New York, where they dramatically raised minimum wage, the incumbents will tell you the sky's going to fall, businesses are going to go out of business, people are going to stop hiring. It's going to expedite them trying to figure out a way to buy the new Burgertron to make burgers, not humans. And what they found was the opposite. That when you increase minimum wage, even dramatically, it grew the economy and jobs. Because here's the wonderful thing about lower and middle income people. When you give them money, they spend it. And so the multiplier effect is more stimulative than when you crowd money into the top 1%. So if a magic wand, first thing, a dramatic increase in minimum wage. And there's very few things we could do that would have this much impact without increasing the deficit. And it's time. We have unemployment at historic lows. So the employment market could absorb an increase in mandatory minimum wage. As a percentage of GDP, wages have never been lower, yet corporate profits have never been greater. So yeah, corporate profits would be hit. yeah, the markets might go down, and it would absolutely be worth it. This is ground zero. That's where we start. Capitalism is about a dignity of work. And because there's such a demand, there's now 1.7 open jobs for every one person seeking a job in the US. I think it's 1.3 to 1 in the US and in the UK. We need to put more money in the hands of lower and middle income households. Full stop.
How many kids have you got, Scott?
I've got 2, 13 and 16-year-old boys.
What is it the advice you give them about the world? They're coming into their adolescence and they're going to be off dating and all of those things. If you had to equip them with, I'm sure you do, what are the messages you're trying hard to either directly equip them with or indirectly infect them with in terms of values and principles for life? For your oldest, you said he's 13?
My oldest is 16. My youngest is 13.
Okay, so 16 years old, Jesus, that's when it all starts happening.
Mm-hmm. So what I try and do is I think about, all right, I want to show these kids that I want to be kind to strangers, right? I want to work hard. I want to have good manners. I want to try, and occasionally someone says something, a service person or whatever is rude to me. And my ego is, when I was your age, I felt like I always needed to restore the world's balance and no one could be disrespectful to me or I got back in their face. And now I realize occasionally you just take it. Occasionally you just take it. That's what it means to be a man. I try to be physically strong. I work out. I try to get them working out. I'm just trying to show them stuff because I find it's very hard when they get to a certain age to advise them. They don't want to hear it. So I'm trying to be that guy. But it's not, I have an easier time advising other 16-year-olds than mine because mine is healthfully pulling away from me. And he'll come back, but right now he's pulling away.
What is masculinity? Isn't that, you're writing a book at the moment, right? You're writing 2 books at the moment about various subject matters. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about what you're writing about?
Yeah, well, I'm finished with the Algebra of Wealth book. I'm just starting the book on masculinity, but I think we need, per our previous comments, I think some unfortunate voices have filled this void around masculinity, and I think we need a new vision for modern masculinity. On the far right, I would argue that those forces have conflated masculinity with cruelty. I think people like Trump and Putin and Elon Musk are looked to as role models for masculinity for a lot of good reasons. But I think being a murderer, Putin, a criminal, Trump, or someone who has 11 kids, none of whom he's living with, Musk, I think that is exactly what it means to not be a man. And when I try and trifurcate the 3 legs of the stool of masculinity, and I'm still working through this, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts, but I come up, and then, so on the far right, let me back up, the wrong vision of masculinity. On the far left, as far as I can tell, their vision of masculinity is to act more like a woman. I don't think that's right either. It's like, well, how do men become better men? Act more like a woman. I mean, I don't think that's not only what men in society are looking for, I don't think that's what women are looking for. I think if there's a fire or Russian soldiers pour over the Ukrainian border, you want some of that big dick energy. And I also think that women are attracted to, generally speaking, this isn't true across the spectrum, we're having a really important conversation and everyone deserves respect, but I think demonstrating a certain level of unabashed masculinity is really important in romantic relationships. And for me, the pillars or the 3 legs of the stool of masculinity, trying to distill it down to 3 things, are first, protector. I think that I was in Seattle at the Westin Hotel and I was checking in and there was an alarm went off and they closed the elevators and said, a smoke alarm has gone off on the 11th floor. And these firefighters about 9 minutes later showed up carrying, each of them must have been carrying 80 pounds of equipment and axes and all sorts of shit. And it was 9 men and 1 woman. And they don't look at the cameras to see if there's a raging fire on the 11th floor. They just bomb to the 11th floor. They're just there to protect people. Like, yeah, we might die. Fireman is actually more dangerous than being a cop. It's more dangerous than being in the military. But they're there to protect you. And whether it's the military or things are cops or people or a head of household that's providing economically, I think being a protector is a key component of masculinity. And I also want to say that masculinity is not isolated to people born as males. I think a lot of women demonstrate masculinity. I think it's a wonderful attribute. I personally end up being more drawn to friends who have more feminine characteristics, which are also wonderful. But generally speaking, if we're going to have an adult conversation around gender and gender roles and masculinity, I think we need to acknowledge that 95% of us will have an easier time embracing these types of behaviors more commonly associated with people born as males and born as females. But the modern vision of protection needs some nuance, and that is the trans community. I think most men don't understand, at their heart, don't really understand the trans community, don't understand the notion that parents and a doctor might decide that a 15-year-old should have surgery and go through transition with hormones. I think the majority of men don't, when that hits them, don't understand it. And I think that lack of understanding can lead to unconscious discrimination and bias. And I think part of being a real protector is to acknowledge that you don't need to understand stuff to protect people. And that is, I think our first inclination should be as men. This is a community. Maybe I understand this. Maybe I don't. Maybe I do know trans people. I don't know trans people. Clear out the politics of it. Clear out your misunderstanding. This is a community that is taking a lot of shit, even you could argue being persecuted. Your first role as a man in his masculinity is to move to protect them. Full stop. That's what we do. We protect people, and we err on the side of protection. And I think that's a really nice attribute, to start from a level of protection. When you see someone being hurt, you don't need to understand the situation. If you see someone getting beaten up in a subway, if you see a fight about to break out in a bar, you don't need to understand the situation. You move to protection. Full stop. That's what we do as men. The second is provider. 70% of divorce filings are from women, and it's usually a function of three things. The guy loses his business, has a mental breakdown, or goes bankrupt. Men are still looked to be the economic provider. And that's not to say that, and part of that is to embrace this wonderful progress women have made, and many times acknowledge, that the woman or your partner is just better at this whole money thing and being supportive and getting out of her way. Because your job is just to ensure, play a role, that you can provide for the family. And then getting to a point where you can take care of yourself, take care of your family, and then start to expand the circle and start taking care of extended family, start taking care of the community, donations, philanthropy. I think that's to be a provider for people that ultimately you don't know is a form of masculinity, right? To plant the seeds of trees that you will never sit under, the shade of which you'll never sit under. And then the final one is procreator. And this is the one I'm working through and will definitely get me in the most trouble. But I do think that part of masculinity is being the initiator in a romantic relationship and pursuing romantic relationships. And there's a difference between pursuit and being a predator. And if you don't understand the difference, you've got much bigger problems. And because of some well-publicized and heinous, abhorrent acts where men abuse their power, now we conflate any sort of initiative or aggression around establishing a romantic relationship as predatory. And I don't think that's true. I think men's role in being more aggressive around romantic relationships, and even aggressive is a tough word, being the initiator, I think that is part of masculinity. I think that's part of success. One of the things, I hope my boys, I think I told you this last time I was here, when I used to go down, I don't do it anymore because it just got too much, but I used to force my kids whenever we went out to talk to a stranger. And we'd sit outside our house with my 13-year-old, very upset because he hadn't talked to a stranger. I wasn't going to let him back in the house. I'm like, just go pet the dog, just say hi, anything. But that ability to initiate contact, professionally, personally, whatever it is, I think it's fundamental to success. And so I think guys need to, early on, hopefully get comfortable with approaching strangers, including strange potential romantic partners.
Because the stats are showing that about 50% of people who end up in relationships made their first contact online. And it's funny, I had a podcast that we did about dating. I won't go into too much context. I don't want to reveal the guest, but a lot of the comments on that podcast were from young men that were really, I think, pissed off with me, to be honest, for not speaking to the person who had created the dating app and telling them highlighting the plight of men in the dating industry. As you've said, with the amount of swipes a man needs to do to find a mate, I need to give a message to those men.
I understand it. And let's move to solutions. So the first is, if you're in the top 10% of quote unquote attractiveness on a risk-adjusted level around economic success, care, women are attracted to men for three reasons. The first is their ability to provide. The second is how smart they are. And the third is how kind they are.
Personality.
Yeah.
Right.
And also intellect can come through in personality. The fastest way to communicate intellect is humor, is to be clever. I've always thought, I've always thought, if I can make a woman laugh, she'll go out with me. And here's the problem. So if you're in the top 10%, go online. It's going to be champagne and cocaine and a Mardi Gras of women for you. I mean, just you're gonna kill it. If you're in the bottom 90, the reality is the online dating market is a humiliating experience for you, because the majority of women, and they're right, can have some contact or interest from the top 10%. Maybe they're not who are looking for a series of short-term relationships and maybe a long-term relationship. But for the bottom 90 of men, especially the bottom half, have just been shut out. They get no activity online. The wonderful thing about human sexuality is there's a ton of X factors: the way you smell, the way you move, your humor, your smile, right? The way your passion for a specific topic, the depth of intellect, whatever it might be. There's just the magic and mystery of the soup of human sexuality is so strange, and it's wonderful. But there's one ingredient in that soup that comes through online. For men, it's money, and for women, it's looks. That's it. And so it's great if you are in the top decile for those things, for either sex. But if you're with us in the bottom 90, it's about the magic and mystery of sexuality that can be expressed in person. And what you find, especially with relationships that begin at work, one will say, I wasn't interested in him, and then I saw him present in a meeting, or I saw how smart he is, or I saw what an interesting person she is and how funny she is. These things are really hard to get across online. And so we need to put more money in the pockets of young people. We need more third spaces and opportunities for them to meet each other. The number of high school kids that see their friends every day has been cut in half. We're no longer talking to our neighbors. We're no longer going to work. So where are people supposed to meet and find out that, yeah, maybe he's not rich, maybe she's not hot, but I'm into this person. I want to go out with them. I want to kiss them.
But I've got so much optionality in both those cases that it seems that I value that less, right? We used to just live in, the options were my village. Now they are the internet.
Everybody. But when we gave access to everybody, everybody's now under the, typically you're right. We were sequestered. You went to temple or church and there were kind of 8 single people, 4 men and 4 women, and they sort of paired off based on, call it a multiple of reasons there. They figured out their weight class. Now it's like, well, I don't have access to 8 people. I have access to 8,000. So why wouldn't I expect that I'm going to get in the top decile? And what you find is that the metrics are so crude and base online that, we just end up, I would task people saying, who have met someone online or who have met someone offline, do you think you would have been attracted to that person, their online profile? Like if you saw a picture of them and then said, this is what I do, would that be like, yeah, that's the one? And that's the beautiful thing about, and it's important, we need more opportunities for people to bump into each other and not decide, to give them the opportunity to kind of fall in lust and in love over time for different reasons that can only be communicated in person. Because us in the lower 90, that's our only hope. And if you just graduated from Dartmouth and you got a job at Google and your Rolex accidentally slips into your profile picture on Tinder, you're all set. 99% of us are not in the top 1%. We're not working for Google, can't afford a Rolex. So you got to bring something else. And it's important to develop those skills. A good rap. Iron your goddamn shirt, blow dry your hair, work out a little bit. Figure out a way that when you have the opportunity to meet someone in person over and over, that they're going to be impressed by you. And then slowly but surely they think, I'm more than impressed by this person. I'd like to have a relationship with them. And we're creating fewer and fewer contexts for that to happen. If we're not even going into work, right? If we're not volunteering, if we're not going to church, like where on earth we're not going to the movies, we're not going to the mall. I used to walk around when I was 17, a senior in high school. We'd go into Westwood Village and we would just walk around. We were too young to drink. We'd get an ice cream And we'd walk around and we'd see a group of girls from Palisades High School. I went to uni. And about the fourth time we passed them, one of us would take the leap and start talking to them. Like, where does that happen now for young people, right? So I think it's economic policies and creating more third spaces. I would like national service. I know a lot of friends from Israel who met their spouses, their business partners, their mentors in military service. I don't think it should just be military. It could be service around helping seniors or healthcare. But we need to give them more money and more opportunities to bump into each other and fall in love with each other and be attracted to each other for the reasons that are unique. Smell. You can't smell someone online. And not only that, you don't even know what smells you're going to be attracted to. You don't even know. And so unless you bump off a bunch of people in person, we're just not going to have nearly as many connections and not nearly as many relationships. But I think there are pretty straightforward solutions here.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.